Chapter 10. Looting. "Now, to our little problem," Trog said. "We want you to help with our work, so you have to be able to move around. But we don't want you running off, so you ought to be tied up. But if you're tied up, you can't work. What's the solution?" Dune said nothing. "The solution that first occurred to me," said Trog, "is to tie up your feet and leave your hands free. But then I thought, Trog, that won't work. If his hands are free, he could just bend down and untie his feet. That was when I remembered some useful things we found the other day at a very interesting store. What was that place, Yorick?" "Over that way," said Yorick, who had flopped down into a fat, shabby armchair. He waved in the direction of Greengate Square. "Funny place, full of a million little bitty things, like screws and bolts and pins and nails and cords and buttons and knobs." Dune went rigid. That had to be his father's store, the small item shop. That was the shop he had lived over all his life until he left Ember. "Yes, very useful place," Trog said. "Bring me that sack, Yorick. That one over there." Yorick heaved himself out of the chair and fetched the sack, and Trog dumped it out on the ground. All kinds of metal doodads clattered out. "Let's see," said Trog. "This might work." From the heap he pulled a couple of C-shaped handles that might have come from cupboard doors. He pressed them together to form a ring. "Just right," he said. "Now we need two more. Here they are. And then some screws and bolts. And this piece of chain. And this nifty little padlock, complete with key. Perfect. Help me here, York." Dune's heart was hammering. Shackled by a chain from his own father's store? "No!" he said. As hard as he could, he rocked the chair he was tied to from side to side, but it made no difference. Yorick held him fast, and Trog worked. First he clamped a pair of handles around one of Dune's ankles, and screwed them tightly together. "Ow!" said Dune. The metal pressed against his bone. Trog ignored him. He cuffed Dune's other ankle. Then he looped the chain through the cuffs and connected its ends with the padlock. "There," he said, grinning his wide grin. "It's just right. Long enough so you can walk, but not run. And it's not possible to undo, even if your hands are free, unless you find yourself a screwdriver, which you won't be able to do, because we will be watching you all the time. Or unless you get your hands on this little key." He held up the key to the padlock, "which you also won't be able to do, because I will hide it where sneaky fingers can't find it." Trog untied the ropes that bound Dune. He tossed them away. Then he stood back and gazed proudly at his new worker. "You'll need one more thing," he said. "A light cap. I'll have Minnie make you one. In the meantime, just stick close to my kids." He nodded to Yorick and Kanza. "You two head out," he said, "and take him with you. Pick up your bags from where we left them, and then start on that neighborhood there." He pointed over toward the school. "I'll bring the wagon and catch up with you in a moment." So the two younger Trogs grabbed Dune's arms, and he stumbled along with them. They headed across the square and around the end of the gathering hall to Greystone Street, where they picked up the bags they'd dropped when they'd captured Dune. Then they turned around and started down Otterwell Street. The cuffs chafed Dune's ankles, but the humiliation of being a slave in his own city was far worse than the pain. He tried not to think about how impossible his predicament was. If he didn't know where the key was, how would he ever get out of here? He would have to count on Lena to bring help, and the very thought of Lena walking alone all the way back to Sparks made him feel so anxious and so miserably guilty that his knees nearly collapsed. It had been a terrible, terrible idea to come here. He wished he had never found that wretched 8-page book. At the corner of School Street, Trog caught up with them. He was hauling a wooden wagon behind him. Dune recognized it as one that used to carry garbage to Ember's trash heaps. Trog poked Dune in the back. "Move along, Droon," he said. "Work to be done." Dune jerked his head around, furious in an instant. "My name is Dune!" he cried. "Not Droon, not Doom. At least call me by my right name." Trog backed away, grinning, stretching forward a big hand as if to ward off a blow. All right. No need to yell," he said. "Glad to see our new boy has some spirit." "I am not your boy," Dune said. "I am my own boy." Kanza, who had hold of Dune's right arm, sniggered. "A fighter," she said. "Ain't he cute?" She made a fake cute face at him, bunching up her lips as if she was going to kiss him, and squeezing his arms so tightly he could feel her fingernails through his sleeve. Dune told himself to hold his temper. Flying into a rage would help nothing, but it was very hard not to. They turned onto Murkish Street and trudged down the block. "All right," said Trog after a while. "We'll start here." They stopped beside a stationery store that Dune remembered had been closed long before people left Ember. Its shelves held nothing but dust. "Upstairs," said Trog, parking the wagon and leading the way to the apartment above. "Open everything," he instructed Dune. "Drawers, cabinets, cupboards, closets, everything. Pull all the stuff out, and we'll sort through it. Any eyeglasses you find, give them to me. I collect them."
"Why?"
asked Dune.
"Because I want perfect vision, of course," said Trog.
"Not that there's anything wrong with my vision, but with the right pair of glasses, you can see for miles. Sometimes you can see in the dark. I just haven't found the right ones yet. Now get busy."
Dune followed instructions. Out came the possessions of whoever had lived here. Sweaters, coats, mittens, scarves, underwear, teacups, soup spoons, knitting needles, salt shakers, bed pillows, bars of soap. And the three Trogs pawed through it. Kanza tried on clothes, and looked at herself in the mirror. "Wouldn't this look good on me?" she said. "Or maybe this."
"No more clothes," bellowed Trog. "You've got enough."
Yorick had a comment about everything he picked up.
"This is a good knife. I'll keep it."
He stuffed it into his bag.
"These cups are useless. We already have some just like them."
He tossed them away, one after another. Some rolled into a corner, some shattered on the floor.
"Look at this ugly shirt. Who would have worn this?"
He wadded it up and pitched it across the room. In the kitchen, Trog snatched up anything that looked edible and crammed it into his bag, sweeping the rest off the shelves. Empty cans and bottles and boxes fell to the floor, bouncing and breaking. Dune noticed that this family had still had a fair amount of food when they left the city, enough to keep a family in Sparks going for several days at least. He made a mental note. There might be houses the Trogs had not yet looted.
"All right," cried Trog finally. "We're finished here. Load the stuff in the wagon, and on to the next."
It was like this the rest of the day. Dune followed along as they looted the homes and businesses of his former friends and neighbors. As they left each place, kicking aside the mess of scattered and broken belongings, Dune said a silent apology to the people who had lived there. They would never know their homes had been robbed and wrecked, nor would they know he had watched it being done. But even so, he felt sorry and guilty. He hated being part of this. At the end of the day, the Trogs gathered around the fire in Harkin Square. They all seemed excited. Dune saw that they were building the fire up higher than usual, and that they'd set up a sort of rack at the edge of it. 2 piles of stones with a metal rod stretched between them. A curtain rod, maybe, or a pipe. Yorick slouched up to his father.
"Shall we go get it, Pa?"
he said.
"Sure," said Trog. "You go too, Kanza, and help him. I'll stay here."
Yorick and Kanza went to the wagon loaded with the day's loot and tossed it all out onto the ground. Then they went off down Gilly Street, pulling the wagon behind them. Dune became aware of Minnie, standing a little distance away, saying something in a trembly voice. Trog noticed her too.
"What, Min?" he said. "Speak up!"
She took a step forward and murmured some more, holding out a folded black cloth.
"Oh, the light cap,"
said Trog.
"Well done."
He strode over and took it from her and handed it to Dune.
"This is for you," he said. "Get one of those candles over there and stick it in this pot."
He pointed to the tube at the front. Dune fetched a candle from a box of them behind the armchair. He held it to the fire to light it, and he put it in the cap and then put the cap on his head. It fit well and gave a useful amount of light. He wondered why no one in Sparks had yet thought up such a thing.
"Cons and Yorick will be gone a while,"
Trog said.
"In the meantime, you can help us get ready."
He picked up a bucket and handed it to Dune.
"We're going to need some more water. See that brown door over there? The one on the corner?"
He pointed at an apartment on Gilly Street.
"That's ours. Go upstairs and fill the bucket."
Dune was puzzled. Upstairs? But...
"Aha!" said Trog. "I know what you're thinking. When I first came to this place, I couldn't figure out where the water came from either. I knew they must have had it. They had sinks, they had bathtubs, but where did the water come from?"
From the river, thought Dune.
"It was a good thing we'd brought some bottles of water with us," Trog said, "because it took us a couple of days of exploring to find it. But we did. You wouldn't believe what we found."
Dune waited.
"An underground river,"
Trog said.
"Yes, it's true. We had to go down about 100 steps to get to it. Did quite a lot of unpleasant cleanup on the way."
"Cleanup?" said Dune.
"Bodies," said Trog. "Must have been some sort of stampede there. Maybe as people were leaving the city. Quite a few dead folks lying around. We dragged them down the steps and shoved them in the river, and it swept them away."
Trog shook his head, wrinkling his nose in disgust. Bodies, Dune thought. Trog seemed to think of them as garbage, but they were citizens of Ember, people he'd probably known, caught in the panic of the last-minute exit. Inwardly he winced in pain, thinking of it, but Trog was going on.
"So the river," he said. "When this city was in working order, the water was pumped up into the pipes that led to the houses. Now, of course, the pump doesn't work. No electricity."
He divided up the syllables in case Dune had trouble understanding the word.
"Have you heard of electricity? It's a kind of magic, very advanced. It's what makes the stars shine."
"I know about it," said Dune. He bit his tongue to keep from saying more.
"So,"
Trog went on,
"there was no way we could go down those steps every day and fetch up buckets of river water. I thought we were going to have to give up the whole project and leave. Then I remembered about the breathing."
He looked up smugly at one of the street lamps, as if he himself were responsible for its occasional glow.
"When the electricity comes on," he said, "the pump comes on too, right? Sometimes for just a few seconds, sometimes for minutes at a time. So in our apartment, and a couple of the other ones on our street, we opened the taps and put the plugs in the sinks and the tubs, and whenever the city breathes, the water comes out. Not exactly a gusher, but a good enough trickle. In a few days, we have water to scoop up whenever we need it. What do you think of that, huh?"
"Clever," said Dune. It was clever. Trog had a knack for figuring things out, Dune had to admit it. And yet he did not see Trog as a truly intelligent person. Trog seemed to think that he knew everything, but strangely enough it was exactly this that made him seem stupid to Dune. A person who thought he knew everything simply didn't understand how much there was to know. Dune took the bucket and trudged away toward the apartment Trog had pointed out. Behind him he heard Trog's voice again.
"Hey you useless flump! Get a bucket and show that dude where to go!"
Dune looked back. The thin boy had picked up a bucket and was lurching after him. Dune waited for him to catch up and followed him through the door, up the stairs, and into the apartment that had been turned into the dwelling place of the Trog family. He knew this place. It had been the home of one of his classmates, Orly Gordon, and Dune had been in it a few times during his school years. The rooms had been tidy then, although shabby, like everything in Ember. Now they were almost unrecognizable. The Trogs must have searched dozens of apartments and dragged everything they liked best into this one. In the orange candlelight, he saw that the main room was crammed with furniture. There were 5 beds, 6 fat armchairs, a brown and orange striped couch piled with cushions and quilts and blankets, and 3 tables piled with dishes. Coats and sweaters and scarves and other clothes hung from hooks and were draped over the furniture. Countless boxes full of canned food stood in teetering stacks, the loot from a great many apartments. The boy was making his way through this maze of stuff toward the bathroom. Dune followed him in and saw that murky water stood in the sink and filled about half the bathtub. They bent over the tub and scooped their buckets in. Dune took a chance. He knew that the boy might tell on him to Trog, but somehow he didn't think so. "Are they keeping you a prisoner here?" he asked. The boy shook his head. "But you don't want to be here, do you?" "Yes, I do," said the boy, hoisting his bucket out of the water. He seemed barely strong enough to do it. His arms trembled. Dune reached over and helped him lift. "But they treat you like a slave," he said. "Wouldn't you leave if you could?" Again the boy just shook his head. "If I could figure out how to get away," Dune said, "would you come with me?" "I can't," the boy said, pointing down at his twisted leg. "I can't walk right." "How did you get down here, then?" Dune asked. "He took me on his back," said the boy. "Trog? So he does care about you, then?" "A little," said the boy. "He's trying to make me strong." "But he's so mean to you." The boy nodded. "He took my treasures." "Treasures?" "Just some things I like. Things I've been collecting." His eyes were so sad as he said this that Dune had to look away. He lifted his bucket, now full and heavy, out of the water. "Why did he take them?" "I was defiant," said the boy. Dune couldn't picture this timid little person being defiant. "You mean you talked back to him?" No. I just didn't jump up fast enough when he told me to." "What's your name?" Dune asked. The boy kept his eyes on the murky water. "He gave me a new name," he said. He heaved up his full bucket and headed for the door. Dune clanked after him. "You could help me find the key," he said. "If I could get this chain off, I could get away and bring someone to rescue you." The boy didn't answer. Water from his bucket sloshed out as he struggled toward the stairs. At the top step, he turned his head halfway toward Dune. "He put my treasures on the top shelf," he said. "I can't reach them." "The top shelf of what?" "In the kitchen." The boy set his bucket down, lowered his bad leg onto the first step, got his other leg down with a little hop, picked up the bucket and moved it down 1 step, and repeated this ungainly process all the way down the stairs. Dune followed. They lugged their buckets of water in silence, and when they got to the bonfire, they emptied them, according to Trog's instructions, into a big pot, which Trog set on the fire. Then they waited. The lame boy sat on the ground, leaning against a pile of sacks with his knees up and his chin on his knees. He stared into the fire without moving. Minnie puttered around, making dinner preparations, and Trog sat in an armchair, sipping from a cup of water he'd scooped from the washtub, and made Dune sit on the ground beside him.
"The day will come," Trog said, "when you'll realize how lucky you were to join up with us here in Darkhold. When that happens, we can get rid of this." He reached down and jangled the chain that bound Dune's feet.
Minnie, who was going by at the time with a sack of potatoes, jumped at the sound.
Of course, we have to be very, very sure, said Trog, before that can happen.
That would be one way out, thought Dune, to pretend that he was happy to be here and wouldn't want to run away. But it would take a long time to prove that to Trog. Dune thought of Lena, alone now, and of his father, injured and disabled. He thought of the people in Sparks, who had so little to get by on for the winter. He thought of the ancient book about something meant for the people of Ember, something he was longing to find. And most of all, he thought of the great sunlit world. He would rather be there and hungry than here and fed. There wasn't time to pretend he'd grown happy with the Trogs. He had to get away, now.